Hi, so my
Okay.
name is Ronit Avadhuta, and I'm going to be talking today about a conlang named Reoxe. So I created Reoxe over the past couple of years with the intent of it being an international auxiliary language or a language that's pretty easy to learn. And I've taught it to several people, like 10, 15. They're able to pick it up quite simply. And at the end of the presentation, also some samples from some of these Reoxe students. And Reoxe is equipped with its own phonetic inventory, grammar, vocabulary, orthography. I know I've seen some great orthography on this meeting throughout today. And yeah, it takes draws from a variety of languages: English, Chinese, Hindi, Japanese, Korean, etc. So yeah, before we go into that, a little bit about me. I'm a current high school junior at the Massachusetts Academy of Math and Science at WPI. And I love learning foreign languages, and that's actually kind of how I got into a little bit into linguistics and conlanging and etc. And my inspiration for Zuriachi was probably some of my early Mandarin classes that I was taking around sixth, seventh grade. And if you want to learn more about me, you can check out this link. So I'd like to talk first about Riashi's phonetic inventory. I think this is a pretty cool part. So I'll start out very broad, like what's all the optional and required phonemes you can have, and then we'll go more and more so towards just what's the bare minimum. What can I get away with only pronouncing that? So a lot of bilabials like pa, ba, ba, some labial dentals, fa, va, mostly va, and then we have a lot of like ta da na. We There's a lot of s z sounds in Miyashi and r l, which personally when I pronounce it I can make little to no distinction, similar to like Korean and Japanese. And then in addition we also have the ja and sometimes the sound. And the yes sound, there's no letter for that sound, but however, at the beginning, if a word starts with a vowel, it may be optional to add. And obviously, a K sound. What's notable to notice is that there's no G sound, so all the G sounds are replaced with a K. So then we're moving a little bit more. Okay, so if I maybe not am able to pronounce all the sounds, for example, the S sound over here, which is not super duper conventional. So what are some placements for that? So we have everything from ba ba fa. So we start to see like less distinguishable. Just if it's bilabial, okay, then it passes. And same thing with labial dental. And the words in Riyashi are designed so that even if you do all this, there should not be too much loss of context. And through context, you should be able to get the meaning. So you see that the tsa here might be replaceable with the cha or even a sa. And likewise with the cha, ja sounds here over here. And we also make less of a distinction between the R and L sounds as mentioned before. And this is really the bare minimum you can get away with, but I caution around the sounds of ja, la, za, but it's just a very small handful of sounds. And this does not include the vowels, and here are some of the vowels. It uses a 5 vowel system, as many languages like Japanese, Arabic, it can use that, very easy to pick up, won't have too much work to do. And there's also a very common unstressed vowel, which it actually has a separate letter for in Ryashi. And in Ryashi orthography and the romanization of Ryashi, it's represented with an I. So that might be a little bit unconventional, as in lots of romanizations, the I might signify a long E sound instead. Then there's obviously the optional eh. So let's talk about some allophones. I remember that, okay, one big thing about Rihashi is that you can make a lot of different sounds. You can have a lot of freedom. And it has, so for a good example of this, the S's and Z's are also interchangeable, and there's a lot of J's in Miyashi. And usually whenever I'm speaking, I'll replace a lot of the J's with the S's sounds, and that honestly makes it sound, I'll show you how it sounds later. But a key thing is to remember context is key. Another thing to remember is that Ryashi actually is very, small vocabulary, because it only needs oh so many building blocks. There's about like 150, 100 in that range base words, and new words are created from that. And if a word does not exist within that realm, you can use foreign words, and there's many possibilities. So let's get into some orthography. This is fairly simple. I mean, you look at this, you see that there's A, B, no C, D, E, F, J, K, L, M, N, O, R, no P. The F and P are almost merged. R is T, U, V. And the X is actually not pronounced X, but actually more functions as a sh sound. Then the Z, which also is similar to the S. Then E and A, which basically almost is just context. It's mainly for orthography difference. And then the I is this unstressed vowel. Of course, these have the Reoxe names as Atuan, Bakaj, Dakaj, Tuan, Fakaj, Shakaj. So basically consonants, you would have Kaj, which means letter. And for vowels, you have Tuan, which is for just means sound. So now we get into something that is reminiscent of like kanji from Japanese. So it's called tinsha. And this literally means sign letter. And these are like little symbols that may serve as very common words. So for example, de is a postpositional location marker. So I'll say a sentence and I'll use only de as the one Reoxe word. So if I say library, de, I study. So it means I study at the library. Whereas is more like a direction, like I'm going in a direction. Like if I say train station, I go. So I'm going to the train station. It's on the way or not there yet. So it does make that distinguishation. And then we have words like je and ze. So je is like here, demonstrative. So like this book. And ze down here, using that. So like, oh, that book. And there's many different types of this, and these can actually be combined. I think at the end of this presentation, I can show how a lot of words for like him, her, they can all be conjugated with just only these, and maybe some of the conventional so that I showed over here. This is the Reoxe and this is the tinsha. And these work hand in hand. And these just make writing easier and faster and communicate more meaning rather than work as a syllabary. Then we get into numbers. Of course, arable numerals are absolutely fine. But yeah, the system is pretty good. It's miditiriva lokchipakusi for 1 to 10. And if you want to include powers of 10 higher, you can go la for 1,000, ra for 1,000,000, and lara for 1,000,000,000, and continue with just exponents. And if you would like decimal, you can put cho, which if you know it, is actually one of the tinsha from before. So they can have many, many uses. Another example is that they can be combined, such as va is what. Cho can actually mean time. So va cho is like what time, but also va ben also works. There's like lots of liberty. So let's get into grammar. There's quite some stuff to do related to grammar, but it follows a standard subject-object verb format, which is the most common grammatical structure. It's very easy to pick up. There are no articles, indefinite or definite. Tense is optional. You don't have to include present, past tense, continuous, any of that. And big thing to remember is that postpositional, not prepositional phrases. So like the library, de, I study, or in Reoxe it would be kuljenze, she's tapi. And there is also tinsha marks the subject of the sentence. So by this, I mean that if we look over here, this ser, if you add it to the end of a word, it makes an E sound. So for example, when I say ji, so it would be a combination of this subject, which literally translates to I as the subject. If I say kul, it means book. Kula means study. So it works like that. And this ser is pretty much required. In very few cases, it can be left out. But honestly, it just mends itself into the word. So it's not even too much of a pain to add. So here are just some, while tense is optional, there is an option of putting tense. And let's just look at some of the 6 tenses that are there. And that might look like a lot, but there's actually just like three main things to look out for. So if we start out with the past perfect or just infinitive, sam. Notice how like I was talking about phonology earlier. I can pronounce the J as an S if I want to. So I say sam, and these endings, some a or also, I'll get into that later. But let's just look at the just look at sam or sama. So it will be sleep. So sam means sleep, and if I say sama, it means to sleep in the infinitive. If I add the ta or even a sa, interchangeable. Those S and T are not interchangeable in all contexts, only in the terms of tense. You can do ta for past tense, and if you want continuous, you can add the E, which is the same E in denoting subject. So you can have ta or jamta or samita. And if you want to say continue, I'm sleeping right now, sinsizami, I'm sleeping right now, and something I will sleep, or zamite. So you have quite some options. So now let's get into some of the interesting features. Well, there's a subject declension sort of. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I was like, don't worry about this A or this O. But essentially how this works is if you have an A, it's a default case. It's for either first person, third person, anything. But O is specifically for second person. And you can also put in a so at the end of a second person. Otherwise, it would become an imperative structure. Where if I say, like, for example, door, so if it door in Reoxe is door, and I say door raro, so the O at the end makes it an infinitive. But I say doraroso, that is like, okay, it's closing the door. And jo is, so it denotes that the action itself is happening nearby you. So like, I don't even have to denote the subject if I put a jo at the end. And if I put so, it's through context, you can figure out that the action is taking not nearby the speaker. That's a little cool thing. That's a little snippet. Then there's also mishaki, which is what I was talking about. Okay, you've got barely 100 to 500 of these like little building blocks that you can combine to make new words. A good example is daimo is academic, then sen or shuen is house. So if I say taimshuen, it means school. Similarly, va and ros, so vars is who. And these are like semantic building blocks that really help get a lot of vocabulary. But even if you don't know the word, you can figure out what it is. And just to get to some tinsha, one of the tinsha is mai, and mai is like this continuous particle. So if I have it in the order, depending on which order it is, it can actually change meaning. So if I have the mai right after the subject, it can mean still. But if I use it to connect two dependent phrases or an independent, then it can mean but, and if I start out, it can mean even though. And as a prefix, it can also mean every. So if I say Mars, it means that everybody. So many different uses. And then Ari is mainly used for intransitive verbs and verbs without a subject. Good example is sol is a sun, so you'd say soliarity. So soliarity means the sun is rising. It's like the sun rises itself almost in a way. And rodisinambalarizo. It's like I don't walk on the road. And you can actually see the resemblance to many existing languages, like in French, if you say je me balade, it says like I'm walking sort of. And yeah, similar to that. The non is actually no. So road is road. Is that like sort of directional or like on marker. Je is like subject I, non is no, and barari, so I'm like walking myself. And foreign words. So okay, Reoxe is very accepting of foreign words and it really helps bring everything together. So here are just some examples. And like so in some Arabic, they'll say kavish sometimes for to ponder deeply. Kam is for emotion, and like in languages like Japanese, it's kan, so it's very similar. Son is like sound, and due is correct. That's from like Mandarin. Bar is just outside, and even road is a foreign word from English. So you can, there's a lot of freedom in that aspect. So let's look more at that there's no prepositional phrases, but like postpositional almost, like road so if you translate it word for word, it's like road to I know walk, but it's that backwards or almost. And another fun fact is that location and time always come first in that order. So you would have the Lafai Sitisho. So like, Lafai means yesterday. Sitisho means 13 o'clock or 1 o'clock. That, so you'd have the time from biggest to smallest. And then Shifanso. So like I ate. And another just a little Easter egg is the tsa generalization. So you may remember that earlier on I said sen is house. So sen. So it means building. It's just like any house. And that sort of, if I say ros, it means person. I say rotsos, it's like anybody. It's like that sort of generalization. And I mean, yeah, that pretty much concludes my talk. I'm just going to show some samples and some other tidbits. But if you want to learn more, check out my book called Reoxe. That's Reoxe on Apple Books. And here are just some of the samples that are from my students I was teaching over some of my classmates over last summer. And here are just some samples that they wrote, just some paragraphs introducing themselves. And this was only through like maybe a month or so of practice with this language. And they were pretty good with it. And yeah, I mean, that's how the orthography looks if like you just shove a paragraph outside. And yeah, let's just talk about some sample translation. So I'll just speak it so that you get an idea of like how does it sound. Like, okay, we'll get a little bit of feeling for it. So they say, Celine, si, Celine, si vous batter mai fai cool. E si isa swav si batte ke mai. Si na mai serso. So this means like on the English translations on the right. Last year I was writing a daily journal, which I wrote some random thoughts in, but I wish to continue it. Then person B asked, wa mai fai shukrasa? It's like, what kind of journal? And then person A says, ne mai shavade iki katsalai. Iki katsa fai shesun te sebadaso. So, well, in every language, there are important pieces of knowledge, but also parts you must practice. But there's also many different ways you can say the same stuff. So this is another way that uses a lot more loan words and foreign words that actually make it easier to understand, even if you're not given the English translation and you don't know any Reoxe. It's like Lenin, to my journal, so the journal. And randoslav, so like random. My desert, so that's like desire. And there's like vajanana, so like what journal? It's like my shape critical, so critical. So important. Critical lie. Critica pratica. Pratica is like practice. Jeke te sevashai. So like and once again, same meaning. And yeah, I mean, that concludes my presentation. I can just, 1 second, I'd like to show, this is actually a snippet from my book, and it actually has a little bit of what I was talking about. Okay, what's that combination of tinkaj and ryokaj? Like D will denote a male, K will denote female. So if you have a word, if you want to say like her, you would have, first, this is from the normal alphabet. This would be a tinkaj, meaning person, and then and this would say, okay, they're far away. So this would mean her. And like that sort of differentiation. And this can actually be done in many different ways. And there's also another thing I want to talk about of like emotions. So I say charkikam, so this means like a spark or a charge. So charkikam is like being excited or etc. And another thing is that there can also be sofikam. So sof means red. So if you say sofikam, it means like anger. So you can say like sofikam icho. But all in all, that concludes my presentation. And any questions?
Thanks so much. Lots of cool chat in the YouTube comments there. I posted a couple of the questions into the chat box here. Only a couple of minutes. We'll try to squeeze a few questions in, but you could then hop over to YouTube and answer a few more if you wanted. The common thing is everyone is saying they're very impressed that you actually got some learners of the language who are both writing and speaking it. But the first YouTube question was, If I understood correctly, sa, ta, and cha are somewhat interchangeable. Why distinguish them in the first place if they end up not really mattering?
So, I mean, this goes into like how I developed the language in the first place. So, Reoxe over time has become more simple, and I can guess you can argue that's the same thing that happens to many of languages we see today, natural or constructed. And in the beginning, there was even more very difficult sounds, but over time, they're becoming less and less important to make a distinction. And I guess this is an effect of that. But at the same time, I said, okay, the distinction can still be there because some words are traditionally, like in the past, I have some speakers who've learned it like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and then some speakers who have learned it less than a year ago. And there's a big difference in like almost archaic and almost modern. And there should still be some sort of general, like, okay, if you're looking back on like maybe an older sample, it's like, okay, why they had this letter? Oh, okay, I see, that must be like now that's represented as S, but like I understand before. So it's a remnant, I guess.
And I guess that would largely be the same for the variation between eh and other vowels. Is it just a variant of a?
The variants of, so there were, I guess for the A variations, there'd be a, and a. So a good example of this in a word would be ja is this demonstrated. Je is like me as an object, but then je as it would come at the end of a sentence because subject, object, verb. So the reality is that these would all come in like different parts of speech almost, and like different parts in the sentence. So that would help you figure out which word you're talking about, but you would almost be able to tell just because of part of speech, and that's more of a stylistic element, I guess.
So there's, like I said, there's a few other questions in the YouTube chat if you want to check those out. I'm going to have to jump over to the next presentation, but thank you so much for sharing your language with us.
Yep, thank you. And if you want to contact me, I have a website that it's if you go to the Mass Academy website, just search it up, and you go to students, you can find my name and just click it, and you should find some information there. And if you can check out my book on Apple Books, Reoxe, Reoxe, that'd be great. And I'll look forward to answering some of your questions on YouTube.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And I'm sure